All right, so we're here today with Brian Delaney, and Brian, part of your job is you're working on ending aging.
That's right, ending it and reversing it.
Right. So talk about a little, just in like what capacity are you working on this problem right now, and how are you involved?
Well, what I'm trying to do, Bill Falloon, whom I work with, has given me this kind of broad scope to basically help solve aging, solve like a math problem. It's like really we want to solve it, and that means ending it and reversing it. And under this kind of very broad mandate, I can do all kinds of things. But concretely, what I've been trying to do, and what he has been trying to do, and our whole team at the Age Reversal Network, which is our new name, is figure out what promising treatments that are available now but maybe need to be tested or that could be available soon should we try to move forward. That's really our focus. There's lots of money going into much longer term solutions or rather kind of more distant solutions to aging, which is great. It's fantastic that traditional investors like Jim Mellon and lots of other people are putting money into a kind of traditional drug development path. People can be cynical about big pharma, but I think it's great if they're going to work on even better senolytic therapy than we currently have, or whatever it might be. But that won't help my parents.
Right.
And other people born in the 30s or 20s, or a lot of people who aren't in good shape, born in the 40s or even early 50s. So our focus really is on what we can do to help people now or damn soon. Yeah. So I spend a lot of time reading literature and kind of becoming a scientist to the extent that I can on my own, going to conferences, meeting these people with startups that are really under the radar, and you really have to travel to get them to talk to you sometimes. You can kind of have a Skype session, but that's not quite enough to get them to give you the info that you want to get. They might sign an NDA, but so I went to Mumbai, for example. Mm-hmm. It's an amazing team doing a bunch of stuff that because they trusted me with information I signed an NDA that I can't talk about, but There's just one example. There are lots of these people, so I try to find these groups that we might want to get funding for example.
Right. So what is, I'm interested right away, what is promising right now that you can talk about that's happening? There's people listening to this who know a lot, are involved in this world. There's people who know this is news to them, that there's age reversal research even going on, and that's a real thing, that people are looking at this, and there's things that are happening now that can benefit them. Yeah. So what are you saying, right now, what are things that we can be telling our parents about and people should be talking about or becoming more aware of?
I think that one of the coolest things that is safe enough to try and effective enough to be worth it and not too expensive is what we're calling now broadly senotherapy. So seno from the Greek meaning old, mm-hmm. but it refers to these senescent cells. So they're not old cells, they're cells that are dysfunctional and they should have undergone what's called apoptosis, self-suicide, but they have these ways of avoiding apoptosis, and they kind of hang around and emit these really
zombie cells.
They're basically zombie cells.
That is
a few people have said that, zombies.
They are like zombie cells, and in many ways, partly because they exude these damaging inflammatory and lots of other damaging chemicals, but also because, like zombies in these television shows, The Walking Dead, and they have all kinds of different ones with different names, they will make, like the zombies in the shows will make normal human zombies, these senescent cells will make other healthy cells senescent.
Wow, okay.
And everybody has these cells, correct?
Everybody has them,
right?
And you get a lot more with age. And it's looking like they have some positive role, some of them. That's where conservative people would say, well, no, you don't want to get rid of these because they have some functional role. But the role is, it has to do with wound healing, and you don't need that many to have that role played. So. And there have been studies in mice that show that when you eliminate some of them, and with these senolytic therapies, meaning from the roots, the lysis of the senescent cells, even though technically it's not lysis, but you only eliminate maybe 20, 30, 40% of these cells. So it's not like you're going to eliminate all of them.
Right.
and then the few that are needed for wound healing or something won't be there. That's not a risk. So, but when you eliminate the amount that you can with these therapies, you see all kinds of amazing things. In the rodent studies with ficitin, a natural substance, you see an extension of lifespan. With dasatinib, which is a cancer drug, combined with quercetin, a natural substance, you see improvement in osteoarthritis, arterial thickening gets better, even calcification is reduced, which is partly what got me interested in taking dasatinib and quercetin, because I discovered when I had a kidney stone, which was really painful, a year and a half ago. To diagnose it, typically you have to get a CT scan, which was unfortunate because it's a huge amount of radiation. But when the doctor was showing me the results of the scan, I saw these that he was doing the sections going up this way, and I see this white circle. I was like, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, that's calcification. You know, you eat really well. You must smoke." I was like, "No, I don't smoke." And that kind of scared me. That I have, with my diet, of course. I didn't have a healthy diet until I was 29, so I maybe got that earlier or have bad genes or something. But and so I wanted that reduced.
Where was the calcification? It was in your.
In the yeah. So actually up here it's clear. I had that checked out. That would have been scary. This was not so non-scary, but it still is not so bad, and it was minimal. It was minimal, but I want it gone. So I thought, all right, I'm going to try this combination of dasatinib and quercetin, and I've done that. I've done 3 rounds of that. So it was pretty aggressive. Most people would only want to do it once every 12 months.
And people do that specifically for the senolytic effect as well too. There's other positive benefits.
Exactly.
So you said quercetin. Is that like just the regular over-the-counter stuff you can buy at any?
Yep.
And how much of that do you take?
Well, when you do this therapy, the dose that we assume is the right dose for humans, translated from the rodents, which is usually on a per kilogram of body mass basis, you divide the rodent dose by 12, and that's a figure that's been debated, but it's under the assumption that we have a slower metabolism. So what we came up with was 2.5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight of dasatinib and 10 times as much quercetin. So and you do that once, wait a week, and do it again, and that is 1 round of senolytic treatment with dasatinib and quercetin. And we do have some initial. This is pre-publication data, but I have gotten permission to talk about it. Initial data with a open label, phase 0, as they used to say, trial, showing that with the endpoint of osteoarthritis, people with bone-on-bone osteoarthritis, there has been improvement. So we don't have the MRI results yet, but the symptomatic improvement is marked, and I think something like, I'm not positive this is right, but something like 9 out of 10 people. Right. So it's an amazing effect.
Do you think that's like is it because there's a reduction of inflammation just throughout the body with that, or is that specifically the senolytic effect?
Great question. It could be a little bit of both, but at least part of it is that it will killing off the senescent cells will induce the relevant stem cell niche to produce more chondrocytes, apparently.
Do you take that intravenously when you do that?
No. It's just the dasatinib, which is unfortunately very expensive, but you only do it once every 12 months, or in my case, if you want to be aggressive, once every 4 or 5 months. It's quite expensive to get in the U.S. There are offshore sources that we're doing assays to figure out which ones are reliable, because you never really know.
Right.
And then the quercetin, you just get a bottle of it from the vitamin store.
Would the quercetin be effective without the other?
It would to some degree. Right. This is one of these marketing terms that is almost always BS. Synergistic. It turns out it literally is the case, quite correctly, that dasatinib together with quercetin has a synergistic senolytic effect. Dasatinib alone will be somewhat senolytic. Quercetin will be even less. You put them together, it's a much more powerful effect.
Now I see all over the place. In my world, I see all over the place. People talking about this and talking about this in terms of fasting as well, having a huge effect on senolytic cells. Should that be done in correlation? Is that something else that people should be doing? Is there strong research to show that fasting? Is this just like a buzz thing that's out there?
It's not just a buzz thing. The way that I would put it is I use the term senotherapy when we started talking. That's because there's senolytics, but there's also senomorphics. These substances that they won't kill senescent cells, but they'll make the secretome, the secretory profile, less injurious. By basically, these cells will secrete a little bit less of these bad signaling molecules. But then you could sort of say there's a third thing, which is senoprevention. What dietary restriction more broadly will do, it will first slow the rate of accumulation or the development of senescent cells. And this is pretty clear with like the normal daily, what they used to call the calorie restriction. Now we're saying dietary restriction because it's not clear the calories are what matter, but that will partly because it slows aging, and the number of senescent cells you have is a function of your age. So you slow biological aging, you will slow the rate of accumulation of senescent cells. We do know that dietary restriction of any form, including fasting, of like 4 or 5 days, or every other day, or 2 days every week, we do know that will increase autophagy, which is different, which is the consumption of damaged parts within the cell, but the cell doesn't die, it becomes healthier. And there are at least 2 studies in rodents showing that fasting will indeed eliminate some senescent cells, nothing like the number that you'll get with these strong senolytic agents. And it does it via a mechanism that would be, for people who want to be hyper cautious, that would be safer. It's basically increased immune surveillance. These senescent cells are really good at avoiding destruction by the immune system. But when you fast, the immune system is somehow more able to locate them and destroy them, but only a small amount. So the conservative approach to eliminating senescent cells is, first of all, practice senoprevention, which is just being healthy and slowing the aging process, basically. But then,
and does that include like other types of stresses, like just having a stressful life? And,
absolutely.
I mean, just like all these, not exercising, sedentary, all those types of things.
Do whatever you can to be healthier, and then you will accumulate senescent cells.
Like your foundational baseline.
Yep, exactly.
Get enough sleep.
Yep. That's
rest,
my
exercise.
My huge failing.
Yes.
Hence, I just drink coffee, which doesn't hurt my sleep, but it does help me deal with the consequences of not sleeping. I'm going to pause now and actually drink the coffee that I have here.
Right.
So they showed that certain kinds of protein make more of these zombie cells?
Certain types of protein?
Like that you ingest?
Oh, well now, that's actually, that brings us to mTOR.
Okay.
In a way, diet, that's actually a great tie-in to what I said about why people are now saying dietary restrictions and calorie restriction.
Right.
It's been known for a long time that you can reduce, or really quite radically, individual amino acids in the diet of mice, and they will live much longer, even though the total number of calories has not been reduced. The methionine restriction studies are the most well known, but there are other individual amino acids that can be restricted and induce radically increased lifespan. And it wasn't known why. But now it's pretty clear that probably has something to do with mTOR signaling. mTOR is the mechanistic, it used to be called mammalian, but it's not just mammals, so it's the mechanistic target of rapamycin. One of these weird things where the protein complex is named after a drug that has an effect on it because the drug happened to have been discovered first. mTOR is this master gatherer of all kinds of different types of signals. It is, you could loosely think of it as the complex that senses how much energy is coming into the body, but it does it in different ways. It senses individual amino acids, it senses sugar, it senses also even hormones, which don't directly have to do with how much energy is coming in, but it's something that can affect whether or not the mTOR signaling goes up or down. When we're growing, it has to be up, because basically when it's up, the downstream, it has all kinds of downstream effects, tons. One of the effects is that one grows. Cells divide. I mean, it's sort of what you need to have at a high level when you're growing. This guy, Mikhail Blagoslowny, a Russian American, has a nice way of summarizing it, that high mTOR signaling is a function, a good function, until you reach skeletal maturity, and then high mTOR signaling, when it continues after maturity, becomes a hyper function, and that's bad. So,
so in general, unless you're growing, you want to be down-regulating mTOR.
Up to a certain point.
Yeah.
And it turns out that mTOR has two, maybe even more, but two complexes, complex 1 and 2. So mTORC1 is the one that is probably best to keep low most of the time. But you know, if you're recovering from surgery, you want it to be higher. And if it gets too low, your body starts to be frail in some ways. mTORC2 seems to be, less is known about it, but that's where you actually want to keep it higher probably. And one of the problems with taking rapamycin long term without pulse dosing it, so you're taking it kind of without taking a break every week or every 2 weeks or something, is that after a while, not initially, it takes a while, but after a while, mTORC2 signaling goes down, and then you get some negative consequences, like people, paradoxically, they're aging more slowly, but they start to get worsened glucoregulatory markers, and even dyslipidemia. So back to protein and senolytics, or the kind of effect on senescent cells. It turns out that in humans, it's interesting that it varies from species to species, but in humans there are certain amino acids that will really pretty readily and rapidly raise mTOR signaling. Leucine is one, isoleucine and valine, but there are some others. It's actually very complicated, the way that mTOR signaling goes up. But one strategy to prevent, this is not going to kill senescent cells, but one strategy for preventing the accumulation of senescent cells, as we said, is just slow aging. One way to slow aging is to lower mTOR signaling. One way to lower mTOR signaling is to reduce protein consumption in general. But if you wanted to eat a lot of protein, and it's not clear that a lot of people need to, but have lowered mTOR signaling, you would tend to eat a kind of vegan diet, because the amino acid profile is going to have less of leucine, isoleucine, and valine.
So the plant-based protein is better for you.
Exactly. And that's where people started. There's a guy, Luigi Fontana, who studied members of the Calorie Restriction Society that I'm still president of. And he now has been looking at these vegan or vegetarian diets and the effect on health. And he's found that even without restricting overall energy intake, calorie intake, if it's a vegan diet, and which is going to be typically lower in protein anyway, but it's going to be really low in these amino acids that are prevalent in meat, these people have improved biomarkers, and that's probably because it's lowering mTOR signaling.
So what has the highest mTOR? Like, would it be red meat or just any kind of animal?
It can sense lots of different types of signals. So I mean, high energy, really high energy, even without a lot of protein, will probably raise mTOR signaling a bit. Testosterone. This is why I have mixed feelings about testosterone replacement therapy.
I knew it. I was so happy you were going to say that.
Yeah, because
because I feel the same way about that.
Yeah, because it's sort of it's one of these things where like there's a spectrum of lots of things, levels of all kinds of substances in the body go down with age, and we sort of assume, all right, we want to restore things to youthful levels. It's logical, of course, because you figure it was at a certain level when we were younger, that maybe if we get it back to that level, we'll be young, right? I mean, it makes a lot of sense. NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, that we do have some empirical evidence that raising levels back up, some evidence, will improve health.
what happens with testosterone?
But with testosterone, we don't.
And you're talking about only people, like if you have naturally high levels, well, go ahead and say
Well,
what you're,
actually, that.
yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself already.
Yeah, but do ask that follow-up question because that's even more interesting and complicated. But to just take an extreme example, I mean, it's clear. I mean, if I snorted some cocaine right now, I would feel great. You know, am I slowing my aging process? Probably not. We haven't done the experiment. You know, I mean, maybe someone should
I
write.
think a lot of people have done the experiment.
Maybe
They
tonight
just haven't
after,
done the
maybe
research.
tonight after the event.
Yeah, exactly. Let's try that. You know, I mean, it'd be great to write up a protocol, get review board approval. Okay, the anti-aging effects of cocaine. The dopamine is flowing. It's like you make connections with people. Maybe it's a really indirect positive effect. Hook up with someone, fall in love. Love is good for and ultimately it increases oxytocin levels. Who knows? But so just the fact that you feel good from something, exactly, doesn't mean it's going to be good for you. Now there are men who feel like they have low energy, and I feel like they do have low energy. They feel it. If they feel it, then they have low energy, and they have low testosterone levels, and you give them testosterone therapy, and they feel better. They feel more vigorous. They feel more desire. They're able to have sex more easily. So I would never want to tell someone they shouldn't do that. I mean, there are things that make you feel better, that improve the quality of life, that may be worth potential downsides. We don't know what the downsides are ultimately. We do know that really obese men who have low testosterone, who should improve their testosterone levels by exercising more and losing weight, but don't want to, that will often convert to estrogen, right? Because of the fat, ultimately. And that will have some negative consequences. I think a lean, fit man who is in his 50s or 60s or older, whose testosterone levels are sinking, who did testosterone therapy and felt better because of it. I think that's not a crazy choice at all. I get that. But it's not clear that it's going to have positive effects. And the reason I bring this up is that one of the many things that mTOR senses is testosterone levels. So from the standpoint of mTOR research, you talk to mTOR experts, they say testosterone is a pro-aging entity. There's just no question about it. You put it into your body, mTOR levels go up.
Skyrocket.
And, may happen with cocaine too. We don't know. We'll find out tonight. But
So what about the people who have the naturally,
that's the tricky thing.
Naturally, do they have the same effect on the mTOR?
Because I just had my testosterone levels measured. I have very high testosterone levels, oddly enough. But I have low. But now I'm not going to praise myself too much because here's the anti-praise. I have low free testosterone because because anyone eating a ketogenic diet, the sexual hormone binding globulin will tend to be really high, and bodybuilders will lament this because they say, oh, I have all this, my balls are producing this huge amount of testosterone, but it's locked up in my sexual hormone binding globulin. Turns out that may not be true. It's not really locked up. It may be that it's able to be used in the right way. So it's not clear, but anyway. But that question is critical because if you have this high level and a high level of free testosterone, which I do not have, I don't know what yours is, I don't know you guys, but you sort of think, well, yeah, of course, that's going to raise mTOR levels. But if you have high free testosterone, it may be that you're so youthful biologically that it doesn't matter so much that mTOR is a little bit higher. But remember that mTOR has so many different things telling it at what level it should be at. If you have naturally high free testosterone that's kind of coming in saying mTOR you should go up, but you're not eating the amino acids that make it go up, not eating the sugar. It's actually insulin that is the sort of secondary effect of having high blood glucose levels. You don't have that, then maybe because it kind of sums all these signals. So maybe it wouldn't matter. In fact, I wouldn't say maybe, I'd say I'd be willing to put money on the fact that it wouldn't matter.
Right.
So, the people who are lathering themselves up with testosterone, maybe it's not so bad for that reason. There could be other reasons why it might not be so good. The castrati, not to suggest people should castrate themselves to live longer, but they did live longer. These Italian boys that were castrated, they lived longer.
Yeah. I don't think that's
Wow.
that's not going to be my way of living longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
For certain like that. One of the things I want to ask you, and with calorie restriction, because you, president of the calorie restriction,
We're now the Calorie Restriction Society International.
Right.
Yeah.
And you've been this for 15 years.
Longer, yeah.
You you practiced calorie restriction. I mean, first of all, what makes up a calorie restrict? Like, how much calories are we talking about?
Well, it's really important to point out that there isn't doesn't seem to be a threshold effect. So it's not, the way that this is reported in the press is that they always want to come up with some reasonable number of calories or percentage reduction that constitutes this diet. And they usually just kind of talk to a researcher who's just trying to get them off the phone, so they just pick a number out of their ass. It's 30% or 40% if you want to be extreme. But you can reduce calories by any amount, and the genes that will slow the aging process begin to turn, different ones at different rates, it turns out, will begin to turn on. But for somebody who really wanted to do this rigorously and severely and really maximize the lifespan benefit, who was able to start at an early enough age that it's safe to do it severely, because it might not be if you're in your 70s or older. The restriction would probably be something like 35 or 40% below what you would eat to be at your set point. And we have to add all those qualifications because unlike the animals in these studies that are all sort of interbred and kind of genetically identical, we're also different. We have different set points, and set point itself is a complicated concept, it's like the weight that you tend towards if you eat normally and you're still in your mid-20s or something. That's how people will typically define set point. But there are so many psychological factors, right, that, non-genetic factors, like if food can be used as punishment in families. So the idea basically is you reduce by that amount from a kind of normal weight for you. And in the rodent studies, it's clear it is not about being thin. There are dangers to having visceral fat, as we all know, but the effect is basically about the restriction below what your body, let us just loosely say, wants. So you have these op mice. You read the literature on the OB. It's just like they're grotesquely fat. They look like these sort of mouse blobs with these two little pink eyes. You put them on CR, extreme CR, to the point where the females will stop menstruating. They're still chunky, actually, and they live really, really long lives. So it's not about the fat. So for someone like me who's naturally thin, it was the biggest problem with CR. I'll just say parenthetically, it's a long story, but it was sort of the hunger I could deal with. I was young enough when I started that I still had enough testosterone that I could kind of have girlfriends and have sex. Being cold, just put on a sweater. That's not a big deal. Save money in Florida because your air conditioning doesn't have to be there. So it's like, great. But the problem for me was just because I'm naturally thin, to be at a level of CR where I would have significant benefit, I just looked unhealthy. I felt great. I really felt great. I started when I was 29. I'm 55 now. I felt great. And then I look in the mirror and I see this Auschwitz survivor staring back at me, and it was like, who's that?
Because you did this for...
Well, I did the extreme version only, to be honest, really. I started to temper it after 4 or 5 years because it just was. I got to think through this.
That's an incredible amount of time.
Wow,
to do
that's
it
a long
was.
time.
First of all, just to me, it seems counterintuitive that there wouldn't be more health risks than benefits in terms of the aging. But I guess that's not the case.
No,
right?
no, it isn't the case. There are risks, like psychological risks, that,
right,
that people in the CR Society often kind of didn't want to talk about because it just gave us bad press, which I can understand. Everyone would have said, oh, but it's because either you want to do this because you have an eating disorder, or you start doing it, you will develop an eating disorder. And I don't see any evidence of that in our members, but I could be wrong. I mean, you do think about food more than you otherwise would, because it's just like, what do we have to do to reproduce?
Because that's just a biological.
You have to eat and have
urge
sex.
Of you, yes.
I mean, and if you don't eat, you die. And so you're just constantly. I mean, the way I dealt with it. I mean, I was in graduate school and I had a lot of work to do. And the way I made it easier for myself is I skipped lunch, which I still do today. So I would eat enough at breakfast that I felt sated, although not that long, because in that early phase where I was eating really little. But I felt sated for a few hours. I'd get to work and my friends would be eating lunch, and I'd kind of join them and just drink coffee, and then I'd start to get hungry, and then by the late afternoon I was really hungry,
Right.
And then I'd have dinner, I'd be sated for a while, and then I'd go to bed hungry, and it was sort of I had so much happening in my life that the hunger wasn't too much of a problem. It really was this kind of, it was ultimately.
What age were you when you started this?
29.
And did you do that specifically, like related to like living longer and the age reversal?
I did, but that's not why I started
or the
it.
age lengthening benefits.
Yeah, that was the
This is
reason.
not age reversal. It's age. This is like all age, just slowing down.
Slowing, yeah, exactly. No, it doesn't reverse. I mean, aging has different components.
Yeah,
it may reverse.
Define some of these things.
Yeah. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, this gut problem, and it may have been a misdiagnosis. I don't know, but I was in San Diego at the time. I'd gone into Mexico. I mean, I thought maybe I got ate a bad burrito, or I don't know what it was, but they diagnosed me with Crohn's disease and told me I'd have to take probably sulfasalazine and probably periodically a lot of prednisone, and every 5 years I'd have to have 10 centimeters of my gut removed, and 50-50 chance of dying of lymphoma when I'm in my 50s. I said, I don't like this. So I went to the medical library and started. In the old days, this was 92 or something, when PubMed hadn't quite, I don't think, been put online, and started reading about nutrition to try to figure out a way to solve the Crohn's disease. I at that point, like a lot of people, I actually did want to live a really long life, a radically long life, but I assumed everyone else was researching, and it turns out no one was, or very few people were. So it wasn't that converted me to being a life extensionist. I already was one, but under the assumption that I could eat junk food and everything would be solved by the year 2000. Anyway, so reading about nutrition, I learned about this research being done by this guy Roy Walford at UCLA, up the street from me, and read these mouse studies and thought, Jesus. And read that it would solve, Crohn's was thought of as an autoimmune disease at that point, and now it may actually be more accurately characterized as inflammatory, not directly autoimmune. We don't really know, but anyway, so I think these studies also would solve autoimmune problems and slow aging by a huge amount. And I thought, God, why isn't everyone talking about this? I mean, I just study after study. I mean, literally hundreds of studies going back to Clive McKay, in the 30s. So I called up Roy Walford and said, why aren't people talking about this? Well, I've written a couple books, Brian, and some people are doing this. And we eventually got together with a few other people, and I started a Usenet group called Life Extension. If people even remember what Usenet is. And the idea was to figure out what we could do to slow aging, and all there was at that point was eating this way. And then we started the CR Society. So yeah, it started out with Crohn's disease, or this diagnosis, which may have been wrong. I was scoped a couple of years ago, and they, all the way, sort of from this end, and then the pill cam, and then from the other end, and the result was, this is so pristine. People with Crohn's disease, at least there'll be some residual scarring.
Right.
They said it can't have been Crohn's disease, and I showed them the original, evidence of the ulceration and the terminal ileum, and they said, yeah, wow, it was Crohn's disease. You totally cured it.
Yeah.
So,
Wow, that's awesome.
yeah.
So that's kind of how you got into the life extension world.
Yep.
So, and then you just always had that passion then? I mean, where
Yeah.
was...
Yeah, and then
Because you become, you do so much stuff now, and you're traveling all over the world, and you're looking at all these new innovations coming up, and I want to get to some of the other innovations and your thoughts on NAD and some of these things. But is that, and then you've just been more and more propelled into this world?
What I did in the 90s was, really I was focused on CR, but I always had an eye out because there were some people in our group that are the kind of foodie CR people, and they just kind of love eating broccoli and kind of weighing out their food and entering their just kind of the whole CR lifestyle.
When you say, how many people around the world would you say are even doing this, like really doing this for a substantial period of time?
Few enough that I should have thrown in the towel of advocacy a long time ago. It's a few thousand probably. In the 90s when it started to get in the news, it could be more.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people doing it at a moderate level, but
Right.
the people are like, I want to live I will do anything I can to live longer. I will restrict myself close to the point where I am starving.
Right.
The number of people doing that is, I think, only a few thousand, to be honest. And in the 90s, the press would want to interview me, and they would always kind of report, this is really cool. And then they'd talk to scientists working on CR mimetics, who would then downplay the efficacy of the diet, partly not to be cynical, or yes, to be cynical, because they want to come up with a pill that they can patent, and
Right.
And I would always say, come on, and they would say, no one will want to do this, or only a few freaks will. And I would want to say, no, if you just tell people how beneficial it will be, millions will want to do it. Well, it turns out, I was wrong. I think people it's just too hard.
So was it vegan when you were doing it?
No, not at first. But then in the end, partly because I just always have so much to do, it turns out that being a vegan saves time, because this is going to sound weird, but washing dishes is faster. Because basically you don't really have to use soap. If the kind of diet I was eating, I would just kind of hot water to kill the bacteria, scrape off whatever might be needed to scrape off, which is like nothing if you're eating, nuts and vegetables. Raw mostly. I was eating raw vegan a lot of times.
Wow.
Plus, you're at least quantity-wise, you're consuming a lot more.
If it's
vegan, and
exactly, yeah. So anyway, so what happened was, so I was focused on CR in the 90s because it didn't seem like there was much else that was available, to people then.
Right.
But then I started I had to make money. And there was at one point we thought that I should be a salaried president, and we would raise funds for that. And I maybe should have taken that route. But instead I kept my kind of academic career going in philosophy. So I didn't have a lot of time to do this, so it was sort of a side project. And then I accidentally moved to Sweden in 2001 and was teaching philosophy then. But I always kept an eye on what other research was happening. So finally what happened was, about 4 or 5 years ago, I started to realize there's enough new cool stuff happening that is probably as good as CR, certainly as good as the moderate CR that most people are capable of achieving, that I was beginning to think about shifting gears. But I was still living in Stockholm, kind of spending a lot of time just living my life and making money doing other things. And then I happened to meet Bill Falloon last year in August, and we met a couple times and had these these 2 dinners, talked for hours, and realized our goals were perfectly in alignment. And he said, Brian, if you want to leave Sweden and move here, I'll put you on retainer and put you in charge of this project that is basically designed to find whatever we can that's available soon, or can be available soon, or available now but needs to be tested, just to solve aging. And I said yes. So now CR is sort of a kind of a back seat for me, even though there are lots of alternative ways of restricted eating that I think people should be thinking about. But now my goal is really to just think about these senolytic therapies, NAD, rapamycin, metformin, and these other things that look to be really effective.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an important point that you make too, because it's also moving on with the progression of these things as they come out. Because you're right, 10, 15 years ago, what were the options? Which CR really was
It was the
One
only
one out there.
Pretty much. I mean, that we had validated. I mean, metformin, we had reason to believe would be effective, but there wasn't really too much evidence. And, some supplements maybe. Resveratrol came along, but that, the lifespan data, there's that mouse study, mice eating junk food do better on resveratrol. But most people who are life extensionists would not be eating junk food. So, and people were excited about stem cells, but we didn't really have, and we still don't have a lot of solid evidence on those. So, but yeah, so it was really dietary restriction.
Right. So the stuff that you're excited about now, I mean, would you still recommend CR to people?
The way that I think about, like, if I met someone who said, I want to live as long as I can, I want to live well, healthy as long as I can, what do I do? I would say, like, start with the decision tree. And the first decision is, are you able, in the broadest sense of able, like, you're not pregnant, you're not predisposed to eating disorders, you've reached skeletal maturity. Are you able to do very severe dietary restriction in some form? It might be this daily 35, 40% reduction. It might be, 5 days of fasting, or like Walter Longo's version, near fasting, like what I'm doing now, a few hundred calories per day or something, 5 days in a row, every 4 weeks, which is a fairly aggressive schedule. Are you able to do something like that? If you are, do that. That's the first decision, I think, for anyone, because that it's clear. I mean, I actually really would stand by this. That still is the most effective thing someone can do, as long as they're not pregnant. You don't want to do it when you're pregnant.
Right.
And as long as you're not, it's hard to know what the age cutoff would be, but when you get to a certain age, that a degree of restriction that would be really effective becomes potentially dangerous. Right. We think, based on the mice study, where when you institute dietary restriction at a late age in more than a mild form, which wouldn't be that effective, they don't live longer. So if you're kind of mid to late 20s up to, late 50s, early 60s, maybe later if you're in really good shape, I would say that's the first decision. And it's boring to talk about diet when there are all these exciting things we read about every day.
And I think with these too, I mean, obviously the individual has to be there, and you need to be in a relatively good state of health if you're looking to make some of these big health choices, like I'm going to fast now for 5 days or whatever it is.
Right.
I mean, there's not I mean, as a doctor who deals with patients, like, I don't have too many patients even bringing up that stuff if they're not already healthy people. Like, that's not where you start with if you're unhealthy. It's if you're really unhealthy, let's start just like clean up your diet first, before we get to some of these extreme, and work your way to that.
But you were also saying that they don't know if it's the calories that's doing it. So I heard you say the other day, time restricted diet, and then someone said intermittent fasting. So are these all the same thing?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, there's the calories versus other macronutrients. That's really separate from the way that you restrict whatever you're eating.
Right.
But when it comes to the macronutrient question, I'm going to be scientifically conservative and say we still don't really know. I think it's the one thing that is likely to be the case is that a huge amount of protein for an adult, someone who's reached skeletal maturity, and someone who doesn't work out a ton, a huge amount of protein, especially the amino acid profile that you get from meat, that's probably not a good idea. I'm pretty confident that we can say that. Everything else, and almost certainly the case that a huge amount of simple sugars, or the kind of carbohydrates that will become simple sugars quickly in your gut, that's probably a bad idea as well. But I have to say that last one, even that's a little tricky, because the Okinawans, the people on the island of Okinawa, who naturally, culturally, one has to say ate, not eat, because it's now beginning to change, who naturally ate a diet that made them live a lot longer, and it was reduced in calories. 80% by calories of their diet was sweet potato. So they were not eating a low carb diet.
Right.
Interesting. But they lived a lot longer. So the simple sugar or carbohydrate thing, that's tricky. But the kind of amino acid profile of eggs, meat, whatever, in huge quantities, we're pretty confident that that's not a good idea. Yeah. So that's one thing. Right. Now, when it comes to the restriction with over time of whatever you're eating, that's a tricky question. Walter Longo, this professor, has written this book called The Longevity Diet, which happens to be the title of the book I wrote with Lisa Walford, although his was in Italian at first. He put on this conference at USC in November, I think, just a month ago or 6 weeks ago, where he brought together lots of people who, it was a great conference. I learned a lot. Lots of people looking at this exact question about the various windows in which we can eat, and there were three, I think, presenters who addressed the specific question of whether or not it mattered at all, whether or not it was the total number of calories averaged out that mattered, and at least in two of the studies, it's clear that when it comes to weight loss, which is what these two researchers looked at, but also biomarkers of metabolic health, it actually doesn't matter. So you can reduce. There's a woman, Michelle Harvey, in the UK at Manchester, who has written some books about diet. This 5-2 diet, where you fast 2 days, or I think it's this sort of near fasting. You just eat a lot less, not zero, 2 days out of the week. She did a study in obese women where one group ate a certain amount less each day, and then another group ate a lot less 2 days a week, but the overall amount averaged out was the same. Both groups lost the same amount of weight. Both groups had benefit. Walter Longo has this diet he calls the fasting mimicking diet. It's actually not that close to 0 calories. I don't know if you know the diet. It's like 1,100 calories on day one and then 700 for each of the following 4 days. What I'm doing now is my variant of that, which is like 200 or 300 calories 5 days in a row. Or like 4 point something, because I started in a different time zone. What he has shown is that there are, if you measure, like I had my BP, my blood pressure measured a couple hours ago, and I have familial high blood pressure. Everyone in my family is on BP medication except for me. And if I'm kind of eating well, NAD actually seems to help with blood pressure, it turns out. Oh, and that's probably why my blood pressure, now that I'm not on normal CR, isn't skyrocketing. It's actually typically like 115, 16 over 67, 68, amazingly. But now, today, it was 100 over 59 or 60, because I've been on this diet for 4 days. And that's typical, that's normal. And my fasting glucose is probably below 60. My morning, I haven't measured it, but. So Longo measured these people, and it endures for a while. And then these values start to get worse again. So I asked him why he hadn't done a study where you compare, let's say someone who eats, like 2,300 calories per day, let's say, and you bring them down to 2,100 calories per day, that's group one. So, that's 6,000 calories per month less, right? 200 times 30, which is about the amount less that people eat on his diet with the 5 days of quasi-fasting. Why hasn't he done that head-to-head comparison? And he said, well, it doesn't really matter, because in his study, these people gain the weight back. And if we see that benefit, because they've gained the weight back, it's clear that the benefit is from the fasting per se, not that there's an overall reduction. But I would like to see the numbers on that, because I really think we need to do the head-to-head study to see if there's a unique, because what everyone is talking about on web pages and in the whole blogosphere is that it's like fasting is this latest thing. Like there's a unique benefit to having these long periods without eating that is not the result of an average decrease. Right. But we don't really have evidence for that yet. We do know that that, and this again, these studies have to be done because it's irritating that people are just sort of assuming that fasting is cool, so let's do it. And
Yeah, it's like the fad thing now. The intermittent fasting thing is like the huge fad thing.
Yeah,
right now.
yeah. I think there's the convenience factor that helps. Like for me, this is a whole tangent, but I'll just mention it briefly, and if we have time, which I think we may be running out of time, we can get into it. But for me, the reason that I can't do daily CR anymore, and I would like to, is that it affects my sleep. And that started happening 6 or 7 years ago. Some neurochemical thing changed. I got into my 40s, and so I could do it and take strong sleep meds every night, and suffer the damage of that, which is minimal, but still it's there. Or I can eat normally, not need sleep meds or not need as many, and then have this period of intense fasting where I get all the benefit, and I don't sleep well, or I take the really strong meds for those 5 days, right? But one of the things we do know is that we suspect, and this is really important, a lot of people are doing this this sort of daily narrow time window of eating, assuming that even if they aren't having an overall reduction in calories and they're not losing weight, they're getting some benefit from this relatively long period without food. The narrower the window, the longer the period. And we still don't have evidence that that's the case, but it probably is the case that going into ketosis, which maybe takes 12, it depends on how much food you've eaten and various other things, 12, 13, 14 hours, that can be good for you. Now, a lot of people assume that the other thing that happens that's really good is that you start going into autophagy. It turns out that is almost certainly not the case. Rodents go into autophagy after 12 hours of fasting, but they have much faster metabolisms. In humans, and it varies from tissue to tissue, oddly. It could take even longer in the brain because that really, the brain will use whatever energy is around, and it may take a while for it to feel starved and for autophagy to kick in, but it probably takes 2.5 or 3 days. So for people who are doing the time-restricted daily, narrow time window of eating to get health benefits, they need to know that they probably are not inducing autophagy, but they are inducing the state of ketosis for a while, which we presume can be beneficial, but even there's still not a lot of evidence.
I've been doing the time restricted for about a year now. I mean, I just feel good doing it.
There's that too.
That's like for me, and that was just surprising for me when I first started doing it. First of all, because I was always of the minds, I was just a person. First of all, I like to eat. It's like it's nice because I only eat in that window, and for me, the way I eat, I can just eat whatever I can eat as much as I want. I don't have to think about it. Whereas more was like portion control, and I was eating throughout the day.
Right.
I thought it'd be really hard. I mean, I'm just a regular workout 4 or 5 days a week in different ways and different capacities. And I always thought I gotta eat before I work out, or I'm gonna feel awful. And it was actually the opposite. I get such better workouts, and my window's in the afternoon to the evening, so I usually start eating between 2 and 3, and somewhere done between 8 and 10, just depending on the day goes. But I always work out either early in the morning or late, 2 or 3 before I start to eat. I actually get better workouts.
I've experienced that. Yeah. I mean, this morning now on my sort of 4th point something day of fasting, I went for this long hike. It was 3.5, 4 hours up this mountain that's near where my hosts live, and it's odd. I mean, I'm lighter, of course, because my gut is essentially empty. Right. That's part of what made it easier, but also I did not feel tired, and I mean, your body learns how to use ketone bodies to generate energy.
I feel great when I'm ketosis, but I've seen people who do not feel good when they're in ketosis.
I know.
I don't know if that's a genetic thing or whatever, but I definitely know people when they get into ketosis, it's they're that much more miserable now that they're in ketosis.
Yeah, my workouts are always better in the afternoon. I haven't eaten, and I don't eat that much anyway during the day. Yeah. So I eat a lot at night, but not during the day.
I mean, all these things. I'm sure there's just so much also dependent on the individual.
Absolutely, but there's also this one of these terms that there's sort of becoming keto adapted, which is one of these kind of blogosphere terms, or as I call it, bro science terms. it's kind of, is
I
there?
think most of the stuff is about the
That's
bro
awesome.
science right
Yeah.
now, but that's
Yeah, a lot
probably
of
will never change.
Bro
I know. A lot of it's pro science. If you go into PubMed, you will see some articles using that term, keto adaptation, and I'm sure it's real. But I haven't seen a lot of evidence for it. But so it could be with a lot of these people, they just haven't become keto adapted yet.
Right.
You know, I'm willing to believe that that's possibly
Yeah.
the case. But so back to this time restricted, daily time restricted eating. One of the things that I found intriguing, there was a presentation about the comparing the isocaloric groups, which is always really important with these diets. By the way, a quick parenthetical: these studies showing that ketogenic diets are healthful sometimes don't look at the control group. They either don't note it at all, or they note it, seem to think it's irrelevant, because a lot of these researchers are weight loss researchers. They say that people on the ketogenic diet will lose weight, and they have these improved metabolic markers. So ketosis is good. Well, it's just a way to lose weight, and
Right.
the ketosis has nothing to do with the improved metabolic markers, right? Like the thing I joke about. I mean, the reason that's a problem, you could say, who cares? It works. The mechanism doesn't matter. But the mechanism does matter for science, and it does matter for people who want to implement it in different ways that may reduce or increase the ketosis. And the whole blogosphere is kind of talking about, well, ketone bodies, how do they have this effect that improves metabolic markers? And it could be irrelevant. Just like kind of my joke diet, only eat foods whose taxonomical names contain letters that I can rearrange to form the names of ex-girlfriends, or whatever it might be. So I'm there in my kitchen. Okay, Brassica oleica. Okay, that Sarah. Right. I was hooked up with her 20 years ago. I can eat broccoli. And then eventually I find something else, and it turns out I'm eating a lot less, and my metabolic markers improve. And then I write this blog about how cool the taxonomic name rearranged to girlfriend diet is. And everyone is speculating about the mechanism of, like, thinking about taxonomy improves brain health and your hippocampus grows. No, it's nothing. It's just you're eating less, dude. I mean, so we have to do the study that all these studies have to be isocaloric.
Right.
Anyway, what I was going to say is that there was a study by I think her name is Christine Peterson, or there was a whole group, but I think she's the lead author, that was presented at Walter Longo's conference, where they compared isocaloric group eating normally, and then a group with this time-restricted window that was early. And the reason they chose the early window is that it is presumed that that's healthier, which is bad news for people like you and,
Yes.
and people like me, who just because to sync that with
Socially,
one's
for me,
social life.
it's almost, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so then someone invites you to dinner. Well, sorry, my window has closed. I will come and kind of drink water, and that just doesn't work. I mean, it's amazing how important eating together is in bonding, and you just to sit there not eating, it just doesn't work. For the other people, like I've gotten used to that sometimes when I'm fasting, but I think it's the other people who feel uncomfortable.
Right.
Anyway, so the assumption is that you need to eat something early on, like protein, to sort of help kickstart the kind of hormonal process. And there's a daily rhythm of mTOR signaling, that mTOR tends to be higher in the morning. For us, for mice, it's the reverse, but I think that's true, yeah. And so you go into this kind of growth and repair mode, and mTOR tends to go down at night, and you go in, growth and sort of have sex and everything. And then at night, it's the repair mode and not growth. And what they found is that it turned out there were some unique benefits to the time-restricted eating, but basically it didn't seem that different from the isocaloric diet. And then I asked her, well, you've got two variables here. You've got the sort of time-restricted eating and the reduction in calories, or I'm sorry, the time-restricted the earliness of it and the reduction in overall energy intake. Can't you try something that's a time-restricted window later? And we joked because there are a lot of people from Spain there, and they tend to eat later. So all the Spaniards can potentially, benefit from this. And it turns out she is planning a trial It's already, and the results will come out, I hope, within a year. Right. And that's really important because the risk of doing what you're doing, which is what I really want to do for an additional reason, which is that my sleep is helped not only when I'm eating more in general, but paradoxically, aside from the risk of reflux, eating really late.
Yeah.
I do not need sleep meds. And for most people, that disturbs their sleep. But for me, it's something about, I think when I don't have enough food, cortisol levels go up.
Same exact way.
Yeah. It's like going to bed with a belly full of food. Everyone says, "Oh, that's horrible. You get reflux and you can't sleep." No, I sleep with a baby.
Yeah, same here.
I thought I had read the opposite actually, and that eating helps you sleep. I mean, I can get the reflux stuff and things like that, but I mean, I might be thinking that because that feels like the case for me too. So I don't.
Well, it's so much true. I mean, for me, it's almost to the point where I have my bed inclined to avoid the reflux, but then I just read about this diurnal cycle of mTOR and what's happening when you're eating late. I mean, really late anyway. Maybe you stop at 8 p.m. and you go to bed at midnight. But even then, the gut is I don't know. But if you eat really late, you've got the mTOR, which collects these signals from different sources, and the genetic program of slow down and go into repair mode is telling mTOR to go down, but then that's being fought by all these energy signals coming into it, and the amino acids. I mean, even if you're eating vegan, there's still some signaling that will tell it to go up, and so you're damaging the process of repair that would typically take place at night. That's my concern with eating really late. So for me, it's like I try to vary it a little bit. Like I don't want to take sleep meds every night. So I have to take breaks from them, and I can take a break by suffering by sleeping 3.5 or 4 hours a night.
Your sleep must be. I mean, to be doing sleep meds, I'm guessing your sleep's like really.
It's a disaster.
Horrendous.
It's a disaster. Yeah. And it's just some genetic thing.
Yeah.
Orexin receptors or GABA receptors, they just don't work. It's like my biggest health.
We have only a little time, so I do want to ask you about NAD and some of the new research that's coming out on NAD and what's happening in that realm. Because I saw you talking about a little bit the presentation you gave the other night, but can you just talk a little bit about what's happening there and your thoughts on the world of NAD right now?
Yeah. I think NAD. So xenotherapy, I mentioned, is one of the most exciting realms of what one can do now to slow and really ultimately in some ways reverse aspects of aging. NAD is one or the other.
Now, is that just also taking just the supplement, or do you need to do the patches?
That's a great question. I'm gonna say just as a general blanket statement, NAD restoration therapy is a good thing.
Okay.
From what we know, we don't have a lot of data in humans, or not even really that much data in mice.
First off, the benefit of NAD is.
Well, the benefits of having the higher levels is all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's involved in DNA repair. It has all kinds of benefits in the body. It's needed for increased sirtuin expression to actually be beneficial. That's why resveratrol plus NAD restoration would be a good choice.
So even taking a supplement of it is a positive.
Yeah. Well, okay, so the way to restore, ideally you get your levels measured. And it's tricky because presumably there's a correlation between blood levels and tissue levels. But if you get an infusion, then there might not be a correlation because you'd have really high blood levels, and it's not clear how much it gets into the tissues, which is one of the reasons why precursors could be a better choice in some ways, because the precursor, at least nicotinamide riboside, does get into the cells. Anyway, ideally you start by getting your blood levels measured, and someone who's I think because I was on dietary restriction for so long, I probably had, and maybe still have, pretty good levels, which is why when I had infusions a year ago, I didn't experience hardly anything of what most people report, even people in their 50s, which is not that old. I really there were a couple of weird, like my strength improved pretty markedly, oddly. I was like measuring carefully how many decline push-ups I can do, and suddenly I could do like 30% more. So there was that. But but ideally you get your measures, your levels measured, and if it's below, whatever, 30, 35, 40 milligrams per, nanograms per milliliter, then you want to restore the levels. And then the question is how. The infusions, direct infusions will obviously raise blood levels, and at least some of that will hang around and get into the tissues. We don't know how much. The patches are cheaper and work well. We think the efficiency, we thought at first it was about 50%. We now think it could be as high as 80%, and it's going to vary from person to person. Right. Now there are lots of other ways being developed. Some are available. You can get intramuscular injections, which some people try for sleep. I've tried it for sleep. It didn't help. But there are sublingual NAD tablets, not a precursor, but actual NAD that presumably is absorbed to some degree. We don't know how much. There's a company called Nuchido in Newcastle in the UK that is developing a nutraceutical that is a non-precursor way to raise NAD levels. So it basically increases the activity of one of the enzymes, NAMPT, involved in the body's production of NAD. The one that declines radically with age. So it's the perfect, and it actually, presumably, they have some very rough initial data, like some people at the company tried it and measured it level, that it will raise it more than the precursor nicotinamide riboside will. I don't know when that's going to be available. Could be within a year. We're not sure about that. Right. So anyway, there are lots of ways to raise NAD levels. What I did, I had the infusions, didn't really feel that much. But what I do now is I take nicotinamide riboside, and I'm pretty convinced, because of my familial high blood pressure, that it's the nicotinamide riboside that is actually, because I'm not on dietary restriction anymore. I'm going to try to stick with this once a month, 5 days of quasi-fasting. Okay. But aside from that, I don't think I'm going to do sort of daily CR. And I really, even though I'm thin, I mean, this is my set point. I'm a skinny dude. I actually have fat, like when I went off CR, it's like, wow, not that much, but I never had this when I was like most of my adult life. Right. It's like, oh yeah, I can pinch an inch, like inch and a half.
How much more do you weigh now than you did it?
I weigh 68 kilograms.
I'm American, so help me out there.
That's like 150 pounds, something like that. Sorry, I've lived in Sweden too long. And when I was on really extreme CR, I weighed, mid 50s kilograms, which would be like, I don't know. Then I was on the U.S. the English system. So it was. I got down to like 128.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and
but you felt great, and you're
so
nourishing yourself still, and it was.
I felt great. Yeah. And my biomarkers were stellar. Like really low LDL, really high HDL.
It's so interesting what you say though, in terms of just like looking yourself in the mirror and like having that like.
It was
shocking response.
Cognitive dissonance. It was like, and it's vanity. I will perfectly happily confess to vanity. It just like. I don't like that look.
When I do keto, right. I just like keto in my body, like I'll just cut, and so when I do keto, I'll lose like 10 pounds less than that, and I get to that point immediately where I start looking at myself in the mirror. I like the way it feels and whatever, and like yeah. I mean, it's vanity. I hate it. It bothers me right away.
Yeah, it's just like too bad. And people say, "Oh, it's great that you're naturally thin." My God, no. I wish I were naturally fat, because then I could be on extreme dietary restriction and look normal, and get all the health benefits. So it's like no. Right. It's like I see people who are naturally overweight, and I just think, wow, you are so lucky. Go on CR, you'll look, kind of whatever our norm is.
Yeah, well, the grass is always greener. Right?
Yeah.
No matter what you do.
Yeah. So NAD, I really believe in NAD. We need more data for all of these things, but NAD.
Is there a lot of research going on with NAD now? I mean, is there a lot? I mean, I hear people talk about NAD all the time, and obviously in this world we're talking about NAD all the time. I mean, is there a lot of people doing research out there, or are there going to be things we're going to find out now?
Part of why Bill and I are working on some of the things we're working on, these kind of things that are available now that we need to do more research on to validate them more, is that no one else is doing it, and the reason is that you can't patent these things. Right. Actually, Chromadex, I think, has a patent. I don't know exactly what the patent is on. It might be on a because you get patents for a substance for a particular use. But so NAD, or no, nicotinamide riboside, that they I think Chromadex has a patent
Yeah, I know that has a patent.
on it. Yeah, but like NAD you can't patent. It's just a part of the body, you know. So
Right.
that's why I think one of the reasons why no one's doing research on it. People are developing other ways of raising NAD levels that they will patent. So that's why Bill is like, he's writing personal checks
Right.
to people to do human trials.
Right. Any risks? Because I know I actually heard you talk about a risk the other night that with NAD. I mean, why wouldn't somebody want to be looking at NAD or shouldn't consider NAD?
Well, I mean, one
Can NAD levels get too high? I mean, what's
well,
the,
absolutely. You know, we don't know what the consequences would be, but certainly you don't want to get any of these things too high, and you don't want to clear all your senescent cells, and you don't want to like you restrict your diet by 70%. You know,
Right.
but there's a pretty clear theoretical foundation for the concern that if you're undergoing chemotherapy or radiation therapy for cancer, that NAD could be a problem, because the way those things work is they damage the DNA of cancer cells, and NAD helps the body, including the cancer cells in your body, repair DNA. So that
what
would be a
about people
caution.
who've gotten over cancers and are
Well-
on the tail end of that stuff now?
Well, then I mean, as long as they're pretty confident that you know, I mean, if they're done with the treatment, then for them and for anyone, there's a minor theoretical risk, and I say this just to be hyper cautious. I don't worry about it myself, but there's a minor theoretical risk that NAD levels will help any existing or little incipient pockets of cancer cells to grow more. But I mean, the effect that NAD levels, healthy NAD levels, have on reducing the risk of cancer, I would claim, we have no evidence, but I would believe would overwhelm that risk.
Right.
So I would not worry about that. But I would, if you're undergoing chemotherapy or radiation therapy, then I would not want to raise NAD levels.
Right. Well, awesome.
Okay.
Well, we're about out of time.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for being
4:53.
here.
Well,
Yeah, we
thank
got to
for
get
having
you
me.
back on here because
Yeah.
there's so much. You have so much information that.
Yeah, actually,
It's great.
there's a lot to talk about. So
Yeah.
so thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, Brian. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
You bet.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks.